Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside. But what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
Wow, wasn't that one of the greatest fight cards we've ever seen? Seriously.
1000%. Need
That
I
was-
say more?
No, that was. I don't think I could really say too much else to intro about connecting to UFC 290 other than that, because that was amazing. We are just coming off the heels of one of the greatest cards of all time, and now we get Holly Holm versus Bueno Silva this Saturday.
Yeah, as one YouTuber alluded to on James Lynch's live stream earlier yesterday, at the time this episode is being released, we might have gone from the greatest UFC card of all time to one of the worst in recent company history. Nonetheless, welcome back to the MMA Outsiders. This is episode 46. My name is Zain Bando. To my left is Tom Albano, and we are so happy to be bringing you this episode this week. We've been over the moon since Saturday night about how amazing UFC 290 was and how just absolutely picture perfect International Fight Week played out for the UFC, as we are now 9 UFC pay-per-views away. That's right, we're in the single digits, 9 UFC pay-per-views away from UFC 300, and UFC 290 definitely had that preliminary feel to it. Nonetheless, as I said, my name is Zain Bando. You can find my work over at bjpen.com. I'm a staff writer there. You can find Tom's work over at Fansided MMA. He also does great work for the PFL, as he has been religiously covering their season as well as PFL Europe over the weekend. He's a busy workhorse. I don't know how he does it. And then, of course, before we get into everything, be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to share the MMA Outsiders all across social media at MMA Outsiders ETV. You should follow the network at ETV Network. And of course, you can follow us for me at Zambando99 on Twitter and Instagram. You can follow Tom or Thomas J. Albano on the exact same platforms as well. We have a lot to get into today, despite the UFC card being probably lesser known to the more so casual audience, but that still doesn't mean we have fight news, because we do, and we also have a lot of recapping of UFC 290 to do as well. But just as a heads up, we did do a almost an immediate live stream yesterday afternoon. You can go check that out across all of the Empty the Bench podcast network, YouTube, and social channels, where we take a bit of a deep dive and do a mini autopsy, if you will, on the event that was UFC 290. Expect more of those in the coming months, just because the end of the year is looking like it's going to be the greatest second half of the year in UFC history, or at least it's looking to be shaping up that way. So we have a lot of exciting stuff planned on the show, as we are now officially into a very busy month of July. And despite it being a dead period of the summer for sports, it is certainly not a dead period in MMA. Tom, what did you think of the weekend that it was? And just give me your overall thoughts, because I think you're pretty ecstatic still, and I think you'll probably be ecstatic for a long time, just considering that July is like a sweet spot month for the UFC, and it keeps delivering over and over and over again.
Yeah, I find it funny that it's Tuesday morning at the time this episode comes out, and I still feel the energy in my bones. Like, that night was just absolutely crazy, and it delivered. And I'm not just talking about the pay-per-view card, by the way. I'm talking about from the very first prelim all the way up to the main event. Because when I saw that very first prelims, then, and I mean the early prelims, which had Ribovich and Kirk, I thought that there was a chance that Ribovich and Kirk could have been the fight of the night. And I'm like, are we going to start with the fight of the night and just go downhill from there? Or is this going to be a card that actually all the momentum carries through? And well, all the momentum carried through. And just to add context, Dan, the day this episode is coming out is the 8-year anniversary of UFC 180, which, in the words of The Score and Nick Baldwin, UFC 189 was always, at least in my opinion and his, the gold standard for UFC and the international fight week events, and how to hype and how a card plays out. And I think, also to borrow from his words, that card now has some competition with the one that we had this past weekend.
Yeah, not only does that one have competition, I'd also put UFC 100 in that rare category too. These all happened around the same time. Of course, you mentioned that it's the 8-year anniversary of UFC 189 on this very day as well. UFC 100 also took place too, so it's been a very July 11th is a very sentimental day in UFC history, and I think will continue to be a very sentimental day as long as the sport continues to exist. But yeah, definitely UFC 290 is up there as not just one of the greatest UFC events ever, but one of the best MMA events I've ever seen. And I've been watching the sport for as long as you have. And this is one of those cards where you and I could look back on this card 5 or 6 years from now, and who the heck knows what the UFC is going to look like by, let me just throw a random number, UFC 345. I can't even believe I'm saying that. By then are we gonna have actors fighting other actors? I don't know. But my point in saying all of this is we can look back in 5 or 6 years and say, yeah, UFC 290 definitely fits that gold standard description. I can't put it above UFC 189 just yet because you had the epic war with Robbie Lawler and Rory McDonald. You had the Jeremy Stevens knockout of Dennis Bermudez. You had a very impressive performance from Gunnar Nelson. And then, of course, to top the card, you had Conor McGregor beating Chad Mendes. So to put UFC 290 over a Conor McGregor card, this is a bit of my bias coming out. That was back when I was starting to get really into Conor McGregor and his whole career and being emotionally invested in it. So that one will always take the cake for me, but UFC 290 has definitely made its case. And I really do think that if that same card was duplicated with the likes of a John Jones or a Khabib or a George St. Pierre or a Conor, I'd have to put it over the top, which is because even though we know Volk is hardcore, and we love Alexander Volkanovski, he has not had the same crazy appeal that some of the other names that I just mentioned had as of yet. I think he's nearly there, but UFC 290 is definitely right there, if not near the top.
Well, you're going to have to hope that Alex Volkanovski, I mean, he's already one of the top 2 or 3, if not the best top pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Well,
I think he is. Yeah.
What I was just going to say was you just got to hope that, he may not have that drawing power now, but the performance like he had and the kind of card that UFC 2 was, you got to hope that he rides the momentum, basically, and can turn into one of those based on what happened.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, let's hypothetically say he wins the Islam Makhachev rematch, and we'll get into the fight itself.
Let's get right into it. Sorry to throw that up, but let's just get right into it since we bring up Volkanovski.
No, of course. To finish my point, though, let's say he beats Islam Makhachev in a rematch that, a lot of people thought the first fight went his way. Let's hypothetically say he beats Makhachev whenever they fight. I mean, hey, I think if we're talking about massive and historical UFC events, UFC 300 might be the perfect backdrop to do a potential trilogy if it's 1-1. Of course, talking about the fight itself, obviously Alexander Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez. We broke it down last week. Super high-level fight. Yair Rodriguez coming in on all of this momentum. Looked like he was going to get cut from the UFC a couple years ago. Strings together a few good wins in a row. Fights Max Holloway really tough. Dominates Josh Emmett to win the interim title. And is now in this position to where we kind of thought, oh, if Volk isn't careful, Rodriguez could make it a firefight. And he fought as well as he could, Tom, but I really do think Alexander Volkanovski's outside pressure is what dictated the pace of this fight. He was obviously able to finish him on the ground with strikes and just looked absolutely masterful doing it. Can you kind of talk about Volkanovski's performance and the way he finished him? And would you say out of all of Volk's title defenses to this point that this is the best he's ever looked?
Absolutely. I mean, I mean, yeah, you could argue that, oh, maybe it was the Max Holloway kind of performance that might have been a little better, simply because of who Max Holloway is. But I mean, you look at the kind of performance that Alex Volkanovski here, uh, Alex Volkanovski had here. When you look back at those Max Holloway fights, especially that second fight, Max Holloway was still able to bring it back to Volkanovski and test him. This was just, you know, bless Yair Rodriguez's heart, but this was one-sided domination. Now, and it was a little more slower paced. It wasn't, first round knockout kind of domination, but Alex Volkanovski, he was very calculated. He had the outside pressure, as you alluded to. Yair Rodriguez just couldn't get inside of him. Yair couldn't take control of the fight. Alex Volkanovski was just dictating the pace. He was dictating where this fight would go. He was landing the better shots. He was avoiding a lot of the shots that Rodriguez was throwing at him. When they grappled, Alex Volkanovski just was in control. And then, as you alluded to, he was able to bring it down to the ground in the third round and get the TKO from there. Because that's the thing that really, I think, stands out to me with this Volk performance. Yeah, it wasn't, just bang, 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 first round knockouts like some of the other fights that happened on this UFC 290 card. But it also wasn't, say, an Anderson Silva kind of one-sided fight and I bring up Anderson Silva because it was just inducted into the Hall of Fame, where he was so much better, and I was just kind of toying around and picking at him, playing at his food. It was kind of a little more on the inside. That Volk was, I wouldn't say playing with Rodriguez, but again, he was using the term calculated. He was very calculated, very technical, and then he was able to bust up Rodriguez in one of the earlier rounds. You could actually see by the end of the second round, I think it was this side of Volkanovski's face, he was pretty damn busted open. Like blood was spilling bad. And then by the third round, he was able to get him to the ground, and it was just blow after blow after blow, got it done with the ground and pound. And, it wasn't the kind of beatdown that, say, the Korean Zombie fight was. I still don't know to this day how the Korean Zombie was able to see the fifth round in that fight.
Absurd. Absolutely absurd.
But Yair Rodriguez, like I said, all credit to him, but it was just too much.
Yeah, I mean, it was too much for sure. And, I want to say I was surprised Rodriguez didn't change his game plan. You would have thought after round one he would have maybe tried to use his wrestling a little bit more to put Volk in deep waters, which is something that Volk has never seen, and he just never and he just didn't even try. I just want to put it to you bluntly. He did not try to change his strategy whatsoever during the entire duration of that fight, even when he knew he was getting badly hurt. That's what it seemed to me. It seemed like he was very passive aggressive, super tentative, and whenever he would take 2 steps forward, it was always 3 steps back every single time.
And Zain, I mean, you also have to remember, like we're talking about, oh, Rodriguez should have used his wrestling more, and I agree, but Volk actually took him down in the first round. You can't discredit, that Volkanovski was the one. Like you talk about dictating the pace of the fight, how we pressured him against the cage multiple times, and obviously leading all up to the third round where he just absolutely blasted him, rocked him to the point where Rodriguez went to the ground and he got the finish there. But even Volk got a first round takedown, and I mentioned last week, and we were previewing this card. I wonder what the first Islam Makhachev fight did for his wrestling, because I think Alex Volkanovski's wrestling, obviously I don't know how much we can judge off this one fight in that first round, but I think his wrestling, if it's improved, then that really steps Alex Volkanovski up for that potential rematch with Islam.
Oh, 100%. And to do it against the guy,
and it just makes him a more dominant fighter than he's already looked at featherweight.
Right, and to do it against the guy in Yair Rodriguez, who's supremely known for his toughness, and to put the damage on him the way that he did was ultra impressive. And this goes to show how Volk can find one little opening, and once that opening is found, the fight is either A, totally shifted, or B, over in a matter of a couple minutes, and that's what happened. This is why if they rematch and Islam isn't careful, I think a rematch between those two, regardless of where it is, whether it's in Abu Dhabi, in Australia, in Vegas, wherever it is, I think a rematch would go very differently than how the first fight went. I think you could see Volk turning the tables on Islam, and I know that's a bold take considering how strategic and effortless Islam's fighting style is and how he has no weaknesses. But you want to talk about someone that took Islam into deep water. The answer to that question is Alexander Volkanovski, and I think a rematch would go much differently and definitely would be very exciting.
Yeah. So on that note, obviously with Yair Rodriguez, it's time to go back to the drawing board. You can't take him out, of a top 5 fight just yet, but I think, and we've talked about it, Zan, all that, could happen now with featherweight. Unfortunately, not only is he back to the drawing board, I think he's got to play. I mean, he needs the recovery time anyways. He's probably going to get medically suspended, but he's going to have to play the waiting game at this point to see what plays out with Max Holloway and Korean Zombie, what plays out with who potentially is going to get the next title fight. If they give Yair Rodriguez, we've talked about how, and actually we made mention on the post-fight stream on Sunday about Arnold Allen also being an odd man out. Do you book Yair Rodriguez versus Arnold Allen? What happens again with Ilya Tapura? Are they going to give him a title shot next? Are they going to have him fight Max Holloway in either a contender fight, maybe in worst case scenario, an interim title fight? We'll get into why I say that in just a second, but your thoughts on what we go from here with Yair Rodriguez?
Well, I wanted to ask you this question. Does Calvin Kattar have a fight booked in the coming months?
Calvin Kattar have a fight book? That's a very good question. Let me double check. Calvin Kattar tore his ACL in October. Let's see. This is a fight, an article from MMA News from April. He said a return to 2023 is possible, but early 2024 is more realistic.
Okay, I was going to say that because isn't he coming off a loss?
He is, yes, but an ACL tear, I think he's going to need more than just especially because it happened in late 2022. He may not fight this year.
Yeah, and I wasn't even saying this year. I'd say he or Arnold Allen are two suitable options. If Calvin Kattar isn't ready to go, I think you give Arnold Allen that fight.
Well,
honestly, this is going to sound dumb, but running back Rodriguez versus Emmett again, I wouldn't be opposed to that.
I wouldn't be opposed to it either. I just think that with Yair, I mean, we definitely need to give him a rising contender. The reason I brought up Arnold Allen is because on the post-fight stream on Sunday, we did mention, hey, Arnold Allen is probably still a fight or two away from a title shot. And I'm just thinking in my head, well, he's ranked number 4 right now. Just give him somebody who's going to be ranked, in the top 3 at this point. Because even though he lost, he's still going to be number 1 ranked contender probably, or number 2 when the rankings come out. Why not just throw that out there?
Yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to that either, and it makes a lot of sense for a main event. So, I'd say let's do it. Although if they do it at the Apex, it's a literal crime. But
yeah, but you know what? Apex never die. They say Pride never die. It's gonna be Apex never die now.
Yeah, I guess it's gonna be Apex never die forever. It looks like. But
let's talk about why I brought up, Holloway and Tapuri, and I threw that interim title there. So, in the immediate aftermath of the fight, Alex Volkanovski mentioned, "Oh, hey, I'm gonna need some surgery." He said it's nothing bad. There's no broken bones. He's calling it a minor surgery, but is not going into detail as to exactly what it is. I think he's been pointing to his arm. I think it has to do with something with his arm, but we don't have the exact details. He says he's not going to be out of action, that he's still going to be training even after getting the surgery, but I kind of want to know what the hell he needs to undergo surgery
Yeah, I'd like to know too. I'd like to know where it stems from. And it could have very well not even been in the fight. It could have easily been in camp leading up to the fight or at
Oh,
some
I'm
other.
certain. But I'm certain. And the only reason I say that, Sand, is because we heard about all the talk about, you know, what he had, that apparently that Volk was somewhat hurt in training camp. He had
And
Rodriguez.
there was that bandage below his eye too.
Yeah, people were talking about could have been some sort of cut, could have been a staph infection, what it could have been. And Volk, I remember Yair Rodriguez in a pre-fight interview saying he doesn't want any excuses from Volk. He wanted a 100% as Volk could be. And well, I mean, if Volk wasn't 100% in that fight, he certainly looked it in terms of
Yeah,
his output.
he definitely looked at. If it's his version of Chuck Liddell having the flu against Jeremy Horn, I think he passed the test with flying colors, if you will.
Alex
Um,
Alex Volkanovski's flu game.
yeah, yeah. Although, as far as we know, he wasn't sick, which is a good thing.
Yeah,
Nonetheless, though, to piggyback off your point, you bring up a very interesting conundrum, which is yet another UFC interim title fight, which could very well be possible considering we don't know how long he's going to be out. This October Abu Dhabi card seems to be in super limbo. We have no idea what's going on with that. We'll get into more of as to why.
yeah, we'll talk about that next.
Yeah, we'll talk about that next. But what's interesting is depending on how long he's out, you know the UFC and you know their contract obligations. They need to ensure that they have a title fight on every pay per view, unless you're Conor McGregor, of course. um, so with that said, you brought up a very interesting point on Sunday during the live stream too, which is the possibility of a interim title fight involving Max Holloway, assuming he wins in August, versus the likes of Ilia Topuria, if you will. Tom, you've been speaking it into existence. How likely is this possibility that the UFC is thinking about it? Do you think it actually comes to fruition, given that this minor surgery is more than likely going to be happening sooner rather than later for the champ?
Again, this is one of those things that's a little frustrating because obviously you have to understand that there are things like hip hop that you can't really go too much into detail, but you know our bigger MMA media members, they're gonna find a way to figure out what the hell it is that he's undergoing some sort of surgery for.
Of
And
course, because that's what they do. That's why the likes of Aaron Bronstead, Nolan King, Ariel Helwani, James Lynch, and many others are the best in the business. Yeah.
exactly. So they're gonna figure out a way to find out what it is that Volk's undergoing surgery for, and it just goes from there. I mean, we do have to note, Zan, speaking of Ilia Topuria, Volk and Topuria got into it a little bit. They showed Volk leading through the crowd, and Volk and Topuria, got into each other's face. They had the confrontation. It seems like after Ilia Topuria just put that absolute beat down a couple of weeks ago on Josh Emmett, that might be the next fight that they want to run. But it all depends on Volk, whatever the surgery is, and how long, if at all, he's going to be out for. So I mean, it depends on where we go from here. If it turns out a actual full on surgery, like a normal surgery, and he's going to be out for some time and needs the extra time, you know, you look at Zan, you look at the potential for that Holloway versus Topuria interim title fight. Now that's granted, we expect how Holloway versus Korean Zombie, how we expect it to play out, and Holloway gets an early finish, like second, third round at least on Korean Zombie, or Max Holloway just puts on a one-sided beatdown and unanimous decision on Korean Zombie, and then it's a
Or Max Holloway somehow loses and screws the entire plan up.
if that happens, yeah, if that happens, that's not good. If that happens, then Topuria, you're gonna have Topuria wait until Volkanovski's ready at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
That's only what's gonna have to happen. Now, if Topuria wins, then it goes back to what we talked about last week, where you can book a number one contenders fight between Holloway and Topuria. I mean, again, Zan, Holloway is, we've called him the quadruple A fighter. The only one he has lost to is Volk. You could point to how Yair Rodriguez got a good handle on him, but at the end, Rodriguez still lost to Holloway. Holloway and Volkanovski are the guys that have beaten everybody in this division. So at that point, with Tapura at this point, with how he beat down Josh Emmett, point and simple, they've got only two choices. It's Volk or it's Holloway.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Volk
But going with my other scenario, if Holloway loses, who does Tapura fight then? That's
the waiting game. Everybody, Volk, Tapura, UFC will all have to play the waiting game if that happens. I say that, Sam, because I honestly think Korean Zombie's laying down the gloves in Singapore. I don't think he's going to come back for another fight.
I think this is his retirement fight too.
Unless Dana and the UFC get absolutely desperate and throw him a bleep ton of money to take the beating from Tapura to give Tapura the interim title.
Which would be the UFC being the UFC.
Yeah, unfortunately. So it all depends on what's going on with Volk. Now, the reason we keep bringing up Islam Makhachev, because that's the good point's going to be, oh, you guys are talking about all of this. We don't even know. Volk, he has teased. He did tease at the press conference. He does want that lightweight title. He does want to avenge that loss to Makhachev, which was his first loss in the UFC. His first loss since it was like his third or fourth professional fight. The thing that why Islam is being brought up is not just because of the rematch, but it's because of an interview Aaron Bronstetter did with Charles Oliveira during the International Fight Week, in which Oliveira has told him he will not be ready to face Islam Makhachev in October. After Charles Oliveira put away Beneil Dariush in, I think it was June at UFC 289 last month, the expectation was, and even Dana White had teased at the post-fight press conference, they were going to do the Islam Makhachev Charles Oliveira rematch in Abu Dhabi, where Islam beat Oliveira last year for the then vacant lightweight title. But obviously those plans are now up, and Oliveira had said, if we can push this to November at MSG or December in Vegas, then I should be good to go. Obviously, Zan, when we're saying that, you bear in mind that Oliveira Dariush was supposed to take place at U88, but some sort of injury pushed that fight back a month to the Vancouver card last month. But Ali Abdelaziz, who, for all intents and purposes, from Dominance M&A, probably most known manager in the game, and is the manager of one Islam Makhachev, said, absolutely not. Makhachev's only going to fight in Abu Dhabi in October. Now, granted, Zan, Ali saying that, not a surprise. We mentioned that on the post-fight stream. The UFC, when they do these events in Abu Dhabi every October, the Abu Dhabi government has some sort of say in what's going to happen. And we've talked about it in the show for months, Zan, when we were talking about playing matchmaker for the rest of the year. The UFC is not going to do a UFC event in Abu Dhabi in October and not have Islam Makhachev in the main event.
Yeah, which leaves you with very few options except to pray and hope or somehow, some way, game the system, if you will, and try to get the winner of Poirier Gaethje to Abu Dhabi, which you and I have talked off air. It makes no sense because assuming that we know how that fight's going to go, both of those guys are not going to be ready to fight for a long time, considering their fighting styles and how they're going to get after it and try to hurt each other as badly as they can. The UFC is in a really difficult spot. They either have to force Oliveira to fight, otherwise someone in the Abu Dhabi or Saudi Arabian government is going to be very, very is going to be very, very upset, to put it lightly.
Or we're going to get some. Okay, so we could do. You got to pray that either Oliveira can somehow still make in October, which I don't know, considering what he just told Bronstetter, one of the best media members in this game. Or you got to pray that the injury to Volkanovski, this minor surgery, isn't going to keep him out for long. And then maybe you can try to do Islam versus Volkanovski. It kind of, kind of makes a little sense. Volk had the home field advantage in his first fight. Now you get a rematch. You could give Islam the home field advantage.
Yeah, that's the fight that they probably have to pray and hope that the surgery timetable lines up to where he'll have a full camp and it can work out. Well, an interesting development before we came on the air, James Lynch had an interview with Charles Oliveira where Oliveira never told James Lynch that he wasn't ready to fight. Then he interviews Bronstetter and says that he isn't ready to fight in October. So James is uncertain as to whether or not his translator misinterpreted what both guys asked Oliveira. It's a very confusing situation, but from what we know, based on what Oliveira's translator said, he is not ready for October. But James did mention it, and that did get a lot of questions after he said that. So I just felt like he needed to bring that up. That this story is a little bit wishy-washy because we don't exactly know where Oliveira stands, but according to the translator, it seems like that's the direction he's going in.
I mean, if that's the case, then that's on the translator because that's this is a pretty big deal. We're talking about October. We're talking about a card, Zan, where the government's going to basically let's just point it blank and simple. The government's going to force that Islam Makhachev is fighting in the main event of that card, which means it's going to be Charles Oliveira, it's going to be Alex Volkanovski, or it's going to be a fight that doesn't make sense. Either trying to get, in the spirit of what we talk about with September in Sydney, which we'll get to when we talk about DDP, trying to get somebody to turn around 2.5 months when we know that Poirier and Gaethje are going to bust each other up in the BMF title fight later this month. So you could be one of them, or we talk about a fight that doesn't make any sense.
Could you imagine, Tom, if it's Islam Makhachev versus Kamaru Usman?
Oh God! Would Kamaru Usman make 155 at this point?
I don't know.
Or you go through the rankings and you go, okay, Oliveira, no, Poirier, Gaethje, no, but give Beneil Dariush a title shot even though he lost to Oliveira, or give it to somebody outside the top 10 like Rafael Fiziev.
Or don't even make the Michael Chandler Conor McGregor fight and give it to Conor.
No, and put Conor McGregor in the fight. So that's why Dana's been very quiet about all this. It's like the evil villain. It's like the evil villain that reveals the master plan, and then they're twirling their evil mustache. Nah, you fell for my master plan.
Could you actually imagine if that was the fight? Oh my goodness!
But again, Zan, it goes back to a point that we even made on the post-fight stream. Not about this kind of potential scenario, more about the Dricus Duplessis thing, which we'll touch on DDP in just a second. But if you want to build a major fight like DDP versus Israel is, or in this case, somehow a potential Islam kind of fight, that can't be a short notice fight. You gotta have a whole sort of promotion for that. That's why I'm saying, is there a chance then that if Oliveira and Volk both aren't ready, the UFC just throws in somebody like a Dariush or a Fiziev, even if they come off a loss or they're not technically ready or they're outside the top 10, just to get Islam to fight?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Okay, so with all that being said, let's say you are Sean Shelby McMahon. Let's say you are in Las Vegas. Tom, you've been tasked with making sure that the rest of the year for pay-per-views is planned out. What do you do if you were given the keys to be the UFC matchmaker for the day and you were asked to plan this Abu Dhabi October main event? Who are you picking to challenge Islam Makhachev for the lightweight championship?
Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm creating a list. It just seems like we need a list here as a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, a plan E, all the way down to plan Z. That's the point where it seems like we need. So plan A obviously is the Oliveira rematch. If Oliveira's not ready, B is going to be Volk. If Volk's not ready, we're bleep. We're FU bleep bleep ed. That's what I think. Let's see. I can't say. I don't want to say Poirier Gaethje. That's completely unfair. But it's gonna be what the UFC does. I don't think if we're going off rankings, I don't think we have a choice. Plan C, it has to be the Poirier Gaethje winner.
Okay, well, I concur with you. Or what the heck? Why not do Islam versus Arman Tarzuki?
I mean, yes, but again, this is one of those cases where somebody outside of the top 5 is going to get a title shot.
Yeah.
Like the UFC has managed to somehow. I actually I can't even blame the UFC on this one. Who expected that Charles Oliveira, or at least the trans, was going to make that kind of comment? That kind of throws
I'm sure. I'm sure the UFC is frantically pissed at the time of this. Well, at the time of this recording and the time that this episode is being released, I'm sure that UFC HQ is in panic, throwing papers. They're probably really upset. I'll admit, if I was the UFC intern this summer, I think I would be really scared going into work today.
I'm very scared going into the war room today.
Yeah, I'm sure that this Tuesday matchmaking meeting, which is going to be in a few hours after this gets posted, is not going to be very pretty.
Oh, it's gonna be something. All right, we'll get into the whole DDP thing and how Sydney in September kind of connects, but can't forget about the co-main event.
Absolutely.
I say that especially because do you remember when we were talking about Volk and Yair main eventing, and I said, well, we talked about the lack of a big star for this card, and we said, well, they're going to need a fight of the year candidate then. Well, it didn't come in Volk versus Yair, but they got one. And they got multiple in this card, but especially this one. Alex Pantoja, the new UFC flyweight champion, defeating Brandon Moreno. Split decision, maybe a bit controversial, but very, very, very close kind of fight. An absolute back and forth war. Both men were wearing the crimson mask by the end. This was absolutely. This was awesome. This was stacked of a fight. You saw both guys trying to take control. You saw the two bust each other up. You saw Pantoja and his grappling Zain. This was just awesome, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a phenomenal fight. For those of you who missed it, please, I don't just encourage you. I beg you, if you are an MMA fan, if you have not seen this fight, go and watch it. Go and watch every second of it. Look up zero spoilers about what happens and just watch it for yourself, because it's one of these master classes in a division that's been so disdained on for years and years and years. Even us on this show, we'll admit it. We have our criticisms of the flyweight division too, but this is the fight. This is one of those fights where the UFC should have no regrets about keeping this division, because these two just went out and just gave it everything they had on Saturday night. And now that I'm thinking about it, it's just amazing to me. Brandon Moreno's fight history over the last 3 years, just consistent back and forth fight of the year candidates. Almost every single fight that he's competed in. Even this one, a very close decision, in my view. But overall, a very entertaining fight. Pantoja doing what he needed to do. Using his grappling later in the fight to neutralize Moreno, hurting Moreno on a couple of occasions. There were several times where it looked like both guys were going to get the finish. They couldn't do it. But overall, a very entertaining fight. Good performance for Pantoja. Nice to see Brazilian male MMA specifically get back on the map and have a champion for sure. It's something that's been lacking in that country for several years now, minus a few rare exceptions. And just overall, a very impressive display from both guys, and a fight that you could watch 100 times new variations of it 100 times and still be satisfied.
Yeah, and you bring up the grappling, and I want to go over to that because that's the whole thing that seemed to be kind of why. Because the first two rounds were very clear. Pantoja got the better of Moreno in the first round, and then Moreno's striking was definitely on point in that second round. So it was 1-1 heading into round 3. And in rounds 3 through 5, we saw a lot of grappling by Pantoja, a lot of backpacking, a lot of especially in the later 2 rounds, trying to get the choke on Moreno. In fact, I think it was the 4th round that he did get a choke on Moreno, and there was a thought maybe that fight could have been ended there, but Moreno was able to get through it. So that's where definitely a lot of why we see all these scorecards going all over the place. 3-2 here, 3-2 here, sometimes a 4-1, where we have it all depends upon this whole, the first stage of criteria of judging effective striking versus effective grappling. And I told you, Zain, on Sunday, I gave rounds 2 and 5 to Moreno. I thought when you asked, if you asked the question of that fight, was Pantoja's grappling able to effectively take out Moreno's striking? In rounds 3 and 4, I say yes, especially round 4, because as I mentioned, he nearly got the choke on Moreno. Round 5, I say no, because all he really did in round 5, Pantoja, towards the later stages of that round, was he backpacked onto him, but it didn't really stop Moreno's activity, and Moreno was landing a few good shots on him in that last round. So ultimately, I had it 48-47 Pantoja.
I had it 2-3. Let's see. So I had round 1 to Pantoja. That was the clearest round of the fight, in my opinion. Round 2 was Moreno. 3 and 4 were difficult to score, but I would say Moreno won round 3. And then, I mean, again, it comes down to how you scored that 4th round. But I had 2, 3, and 4 for Moreno, and then round 5 was a clear Pantoja round, and so was round 1. But the fight was very close.
See, I mean, even we're all over the place with this, but it all depends upon what you really think about the grappling aspect of everything. So,
I think effective strikes from the bottom. To me, I think it's ridiculous that they don't count for something, and if they do, they need to count for more.
I do agree on that. I wish that
there needs to be a clearer criteria for that particular technique in a fight, if you will.
Actually, even John Anik got in there. So, because I followed John Anik, and our account follows John Anik on social media, and apparently John Anik chimed into a tweet conversation between Cody Merrow and Sean Sheehan of SureDog.com. So yeah, and actually, it all stems from Cody Merrow quote tweeting Ben Askren, because Ben Askren, and I don't know if you saw, he actually just commented, "How did one judge score 49-46 Moreno? That's so insane." And that step is where a lot of this stems from. Is that one judge somehow scored rounds 2 through 5 all for Moreno, which I think is a little bit ridiculous. And you have Sheehan basically trying to defend that Pantoja basically didn't win every round clearly. And here was Anik's take. I'm going to quote from, to give rounds 3, 4, and 5 to Moreno is to suggest that you have no respect for effective grappling in an MMA fight. Pantoja repeatedly was able to take the fight to his world, dominate positions. Moreno couldn't adjust. I'm not even willing to chat about this.
Yeah, well, and my response to that is John Anik is obviously the gold standard for MMA commentary, so I think he would know more than 99% of us. I just think every round was so close that Moreno was still in the fight. It's not like he wasn't doing anything to provide any offense. It's not like he was getting overwhelmed by Pantoja. 1000%. Pantoja, showed that his grappling was an elite level, but he didn't show me enough to where he was trying to finish him in every round, which is why I only gave him the 5th round, which was the closest to me as to where he came to finishing that fight. And that's just how I viewed it. I thought it was either going to be 48-47, 48-47 or 49-48 Moreno or a draw.
I thought it was going to be either a draw or 48-47 one way. But I will agree with Anik when it comes to that one judge's scorecard. I don't know really if I can respect giving Moreno 4 straight rounds after giving Pantoja the first. I feel like there was one round where, as you mentioned, Zain, maybe I'm getting confused between the 4th and the 5th round. Maybe I'm mixing up. But one of those 2 rounds, Pantoja nearly got a choke on Moreno. And I think, that's nearly finishing the fight. That's got to count for something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was now that I'm thinking of it, it was probably round 5, but now because the fight.
Of those, so round 4 and 5, one of them, Pantoja got the choke, and I gave it to him. The other one, Zain, that we're alluding to, whichever one it wasn't the one that he got the choke in, was the closest. Was, as you said, was the closest fight. That was the toss-up round.
Okay, gotcha. Well, I just remember from watching the fight, round 5, Pantoja clearly won.
So ultimately, I could have seen this as 48-47 either way. It's just, I feel like you can't. You can give Moreno one of the last 3 rounds. I don't think you can give him all 3.
No, 1000%.
And I agree with Anik that if you gave Moreno all 3 of the last 3 rounds 3 through 5, you don't respect grappling enough in the sport.
That's true. Yeah, if I was a judge, there's no way I would have given 4 rounds to Moreno whatsoever, just based on the sheer principle of the unified rules. It wouldn't make sense.
And I kind of want to focus on the positivity because I don't want to get into another commission rant about somebody screwing up. That seems.
But again, Tom, it's another Nevada decision that we're talking. It's another one in the same damn state, in the venue across the street. It's the same theme every freaking weekend.
I know. I wish there was some sort of accountability. I know Andy Foster in California has previously stated that he is going to release some, that judges will, any notes from them defending their scorecard, he's going to start to release them, but I just don't think anybody is going to follow through on that.
No, unless you're a very smart MMA media member who, quite frankly, is in fear of losing their access, then go for
it. Right. I just mean, credit to Andy Foster, credit to the California Commission, because I know they're trying their best to try to bring this sport into an even more modern age, but it's just, and hold everybody accountable. But it's just, I've lost all faith in commissions at this point.
Yeah, I think pretty much everybody has. Okay, so nonetheless, Pantoja, new flyweight champion.
But considering the circumstances of the scorecards, you got to do the rematch.
Right. I mean, I think that's the only fight that makes sense. James Lynch disagrees. He says that because Moreno lost the fight and because he didn't have a full-on title defense in his first run and stuff like that, he doesn't think Moreno is deserving. I think that's a little bit of it out of bounds, just because Moreno's been in big fights over the last 3 years and has proven to be a championship caliber fighter in all of them.
I agree, but at the same time, I actually kind of understand if they don't, because remember, technically this was their 3rd encounter. One encounter doesn't count because it was an exhibition, because it was an Ultimate Fighter bout. So if you want to say, well, Pantoja won all 3 times, we got to give this a rest. I mean, fine. Dana has mentioned at the post-fight press conference, though, that, hey, we could run this, the flyweights are so talented that at this point you could do a lot of fight forevers. But at the same time, did mention that Brandon Royval was there at the T-Mobile Arena, and basically told Dana, let me get into the cage. I want to get into the cage and do something there and have a little confrontation. And Dana obviously didn't let him, but said he is considering Brandon Royval in the title picture, essentially. So you're going to have Brandon Royval. You got these two. You got Amir Albazi. So I wouldn't be mad, Zan, if Royval or Albazi got the next title shot, and then Brandon Moreno got whoever didn't get the next title shot of those two.
Would you be opposed to Brandon Moreno fighting for an interim UFC flyweight championship in his next fight? To do a unification bout if he wins.
What's the purpose of an interim title? It's only Santosha's not available or some other.
It would make the next fight that much bigger, in my opinion.
I'd be opposed to putting the title on the line. I wouldn't be opposed to a fight itself.
Okay.
That's my take. So,
okay.
And obviously, Figueiredo is still listed number one as a contender, but his situation is obviously a bit murky. Said he was going to go up to bantamweight, didn't go up to bantamweight. And Zain actually originally was scheduled to face Manel Kape on the pay-per-view in the original card, but then that fight ended up falling through with injuries and stuff.
Yeah.
So that Figueiredo situation is a little bit murky. Plus, he ended up losing the rivalry to Moreno anyway. He got finished by him in January. He needs some time away from the picture a little bit.
Absolutely.
All right. Yo, it's him. It's DDP. It doesn't work. But DDP, the hype train all through. Zan, this is the one that I was hoping I was wrong in the official picks for, and I was glad damn to be wrong. Dricus du Plessis. I have been on this guy's hype train, Zan. You know my story. I told it on the stream. I've been following him since 2016. I got to see him win championships in EFC Africa. Again, not to be confused with the Eagle FC promotion of Khabib and the KSW. And now he's gonna fight Israel Adesanya, one of the best damn fighters in the world, for a middleweight championship.
Yeah, I mean, this was an absolutely amazing performance. This is just, we'll get to this in a second, but for international MMA to have two unbelievable talents at the height of their careers, two guys who have faced several common opponents in the past, two guys that like to win impressively, two guys that win viciously. I mean, you could not ask for a more hyped up middleweight title fight than what we're going to get, hopefully in either the next 10 weeks or sometime later next year, in DDP versus Adesanya. And DDP did something to Robert Whittaker that no one except Israel Adesanya, at least in the UFC, from what I can recall, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but Robert Whittaker doesn't get knocked out like that, and DDP was able to do something that nobody's been able to do outside of the champion to Robert Whittaker. And that's just the part that gets me. Like the way he was able to effortlessly beat a former champion and a guy that's been an icon of Australian MMA for years now, and in the fashion that he did it, and it was absolutely unbelievable. And granted, it did take away a trilogy fight between Adesanya and Whittaker, but let's be honest, we really wanted to see a trilogy again. Or a trilogy.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I know people are defending that trilogy and people love Whittaker, but I was kind of hoping inside, like we talked about the UFC, kind of hoping I didn't want to see the trilogy. Adesanya finished Whittaker in the first fight. It was a one-sided decision in the second. There was no need for a trilogy. The problem was Israel Adesanya at this point has run through the middleweight division, with the exception now of some of the up-and-comers. Obviously, Pereira beat him, and then he got the win back in April. But now somebody like DDP, and obviously that can stretch to Pereira and some of these other guys in the lower part of the rankings. It's fresher faces, which is what Adesanya in the middleweight division has needed.
For sure. Well said.
And so, kind of like you said, that going off it, obviously it was a title eliminator, so you got to give him a title shot next. But just the whole way that it was finished, this fight, and just the whole circumstances, everything, as you kind of alluded to, nobody beat Robert Whittaker in the way Duplessis did, other than Israel Adesanya, which I think makes the tense in-cage interactions that they had after the fight that mean that much more. It makes the fight hype mean that much more. That nobody has done anything that Adesanya has done until Duplessis arrived.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think the big question now is, I think it's obvious DDP poses the biggest threat to Israel Adesanya that we've ever seen. The big question now is going to be, is this a changing of the guard in the middleweight division? Because don't be surprised if Duplessis is a small underdog going into a potential fight with Adesanya, just considering the way he beat Whittaker. I would not be surprised if Vegas gives him a puncher's chance and in terms of the odds.
And I think, Zain, this might be a crazy take, knowing how some people love Adesanya and how crazy Adesanya has gotten. But I think you have to give Duplessis a puncher's chance. Think about it. We've talked about, DDP and his nose and his cardio. It's going to get the better of him eventually. So far, it hasn't. And how, DDP needs to, he's going to get destroyed by Whittaker. And he destroyed Whittaker. He has been, everyone is saying, no, he's not gonna, his train's gonna run it. And he just doesn't stop. And now he's taking on somebody who has had his own hype train in the past, and Israel Adesanya has finished guys in the way Adesanya has finished guys before, has dominated guys before. It's like, you have to give him the chance because, you have to wonder deep down inside. Adesanya can talk all that he wants, and we'll get into his comments in just a second, but I think even Adesanya has to realize that DDP has a legitimate chance of beating him. And I'm not talking about a lucky puncher's chance. I'm talking about there is a chance DDP is able to get this fight.
Yeah, this is shades of Lyoto Machida versus Rashad Evans. That's what it feels like. Where it was like you wanted to pick Machida, but you were nervous. But then again, when he won, it was like, wow, Lyoto Machida just did that to the then undefeated Rashad Evans. Where that was the first ever fight where you had a title fight between two fighters who were undefeated.
Welcome to the Machida era, right?
Yeah, which didn't last very long. Which to this day, I still think he lost to Shogun Rua in their first fight, but that's another discussion for another day.
My point is that, by the way, my point is that you are kind of right. Like, obviously, even if he loses to DDP the first time, Israel Adesanya can get the belt back in a rematch. He did that with Pereira. But I think
Tom, could you imagine that would be the biggest rematch in UFC middleweight history if they were able to do it with DDP as the champ on the other side? That's crazy.
It would be nuts. My whole point is, and I think Israel Adesanya, it's a must win for him against DDP, just to say this is still what happened against Pereira was a fluke. Because if he loses to Duplessis, then you're right. Then this is basically a changing of the guard. Even if Pereira would win the belt back and become a 3-time middleweight champ, it pretty much showcases a loss to DDP this first time around, is that, that basically Adesanya as this dominant champion, he's not that dominant anymore at that point.
I mean, could you imagine a scenario where Pereira beats Jan Blachowicz, beats Jamal Hill to win the light heavyweight title, and then you do a champ versus champ fight, or Adesanya Pereira again, or DDP versus Pereira for the light heavyweight title? That would be insanity.
That's crazy talk right now. I just want to get to this first fight. I'm so excited for this first fight. All right, so the comments that Israel Adesanya made in the aftermath, where he went into the cage and, let's say for lack of a better term, let's say for lack of a better description, used the N-word multiple times to basically try and prove a point that Dricus Du Plessis, who hails from South Africa, is not a true African. Now,
yeah, which is bizarre.
I think some of it, like I said on the post-fight stream, stems from history within the continents that I'm not going to get into because one, it's not my place to get into, and two,
Right.
I'm not a history teacher, so that's But if you know anything about the history of South Africa, obviously there is racial tension within the history, and obviously Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya. Need I say more? But point blank, Zan, I think who said it honestly the best on social media? Ben the Bane Davis. Israel Adesanya was trying to goad du Plessis into calling him the N-word.
Yeah.
That's basically what was going on. And we talked about on the stream, on the post-fight stream, and I mean, I'll still make mention of that tweet that Ben Davis put out because it had a lot of replies to it. And basically, all this talk about how he was being goaded. Should he have said it? Should he have not? I mean, I think it's bad enough, Zan, that Israel was saying it already, because I mean, let's face it. And I'm only saying this because Ben the Bane Davis posted. If DDP had said it, everyone would be calling for him to be canceled.
Oh, for sure.
Everyone would be able to call him to be canceled. So you can say Adesanya has the pass all he wants. He's allowed to say it because of his race. But there's another problem to it, which we kind of discussed, Zan, is that they're on a platform owned by Disney.
Yeah.
Like maybe the pay-per-view, maybe the fact that it was on pay-per-view slides it a little, but imagine if this had taken place on ABC.
It would have been really bad. It would have been so bad that we would have literally spent the entire episode talking about how this took place on ABC, and that would literally be the only thing we'd be speaking about.
And basically, you think of the consequences. Like, obviously, with ABC and ESPN, they can delay it. They can cut the audio. We've seen them cut tirades like that, but I think it's just going to be the nature of everything, especially, Zan, because ESPN Plus doesn't censor stuff. So that would have made the way out on social media. And then, we're talking about, all these calls about, one of them should be released. One of them, in the case of Adesanya, should be stripped of the title. Like,
No.
it would be an absolute bloodbath. Now, Dana.
No, I don't think he should. I don't think he should be stripped of the title personally.
I'm not talking about now. I'm talking about if it was on ABC. If this had happened.
Oh yeah. I mean, there would have definitely been a case for him to be stripped of the title for sure, given the platform. But continue with what you were saying.
Okay, my whole point is that Dana in the post-fight conference said, I'm not going to do anything about this. I'm not going to censor my fighters. I'm going to let them be them. Now, if you want to call out Dana being BS on that, fine by me. But that's something he has said in the past too, is that he's not going to censor his fighters and try to prevent them from saying things. I guess it's setting up for something bad because this is just the first stage of the fight hype, which means when we get to the last press conference before this, what is that going to look like?
Well, Tom, my question is, what is this promo going to look like?
I know. That's what I'm a little worried about too. Like if the first stage of the fight hype has racial overtones like this, with Israel Adesanya dropping the N-word, what is the rest of this fight hype going to play out?
Imagine if in bold capital letters it just says racial overtones Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis for the middleweight championship.
Hold on a minute. That's my take. Curb that. And Zan, I think it's also worse when you consider that there's a good chance by the end of this year we're also going to have Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington fight hype to be talked about too. And you don't think, I'm scared Colby Covington might cross the line.
Yeah, he probably will. He'll probably remind Sean Morgan to do 10 more push-ups too.
Oh God, that's why I'm so scared. And yet people on Ben Bendabane Davis was tweet. We're pointing this out, and yet the fact that there are racial overtones means people are going to purchase this pay-per-view. One or the other gets slammed.
Oh, without a doubt.
Like that's the sick part of it. It is going to get more pay-per-view buys. It is going to increase the fight hype.
Oh, without a doubt, no question.
All right.
Now I have to ask you this: if you were asked to go to this fight as a member of the media, would you be nervous to go?
Yes. Yes.
Would you be nervous that there would be a melee on Media Row as the fight was going on?
Yes.
Because I would be really nervous.
Yes, especially normally I should say no because like that's good immediate concept, but considering we got racial overtones with this fight, yes.
Yeah, that's going to be a scene. Do you agree? Do you agree with Andreas Hale's take that this will be darker than Khabib versus Conor, or is that a stretch? I would disagree. It's gonna get there, but it's not gonna get as bad as what that was. Because to me, it felt like they wanted to genuinely kill each other if they tried. Obviously, that didn't happen.
Here's what I think, Zan. I don't think it's gonna get to the point where you got the massive melee in the cage like 229 was, but I think there's a chance where, some of Conor's comments came from, some dark history about, Dagestan and Khabib's family. I would not be surprised if we get to those kinds of comments with this fight hype.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to say anyone who is considering going to this fight, good luck and be as safe as humanly possible.
And don't do anything stupid.
No. But you know what kind of sucks though is this fight should be taking place in Africa.
Okay, actually, you're right. We're not done because let's talk about that. So we bring up Sydney. The UFC can't make this fight 9 weeks for Sydney, can they? With the kind of hype that's going on with this fight, they can't do that.
I don't think so, but just as an FYI, don't be surprised if they do because they're that desperate to get a main event.
I know, but and that's why I think I mentioned Sydney when we also mentioned Abu Dhabi. UFC has already shot itself in the foot with this Sydney card in 9 weeks, and now they've just and now they've also been dealt a bad hand potentially when you've got the following month is Charles Oliveira not being ready for Islam Makhachev supposedly. So they've got to figure situation over these next couple of months of pay-per-views. Yeah. Obviously this month and August they're set. I'm talking about September and October.
Well, we hope, knock on wood, that they're set for August. Praying that nothing happens, of course. I mean, that's a major fight in Boston.
Right. But my point was, I mean, they've got to have some sort of backup plan in place for September, right? I mean, according to Dana, Yuri is good to go. Do you book Jamal Hill versus Yuri for September just to get something on the card?
I think you might have to look at that for Fight Island and not Australia as a co-main event.
And what do you do for Australia?
I think they're going to do everything they can to make this fight.
Oh, I just got a really sick idea.
Okay, what is it?
And I don't mean sick as in good. I mean bad sick.
Oh, okay. What's your sick feeling?
They're going to take two random 135ers, women's 135ers, and say, hey, how would you like to compete at 145 for a fight? And we'll put the featherweight title on the line.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, I mean, I think people would literally, Tom, I'm sorry, but I think people would literally boycott and not even show up to the event.
But I'm just talking out of desperation.
I know. But you're gonna do that a week before Shevchenko versus Grasso in Vegas.
What other choice do they have? Whaley's not available. She's defending her title in next month. She's not available.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I
She's
forgot
not
about that.
available. Flyweight just fought. Bantamweight's in August. Featherweight just defended. Lightweight, we got to see what the hell's going on with this Abu Dhabi card. Welterweight,
Probably MSG.
probably a co-main event. Either for MSG or for this, even December. But I think it might be a little crazy doing a title fight and a Conor fight all in the same one. I know they've done it before with 196 with Misha and Ali, but I don't
And
know
Holly Holm.
that
Yeah.
again. So you got to see, but potential co-main event for MSG, unless Leon talked about fighting in Abu Dhabi. Unless unless the government is so desperate and Dana desperate that they just make that fight.
Or how about this? Going out of left field, you do an interim heavyweight title fight, considering that Jones and Stipe could retire at the same time a month, 2 months later.
There is that possibility, and that would be a possibility because middleweight, again, up in the air, that you're trying to avoid a 9-week turnaround in order to get this fight as much hype as possible and get TDP as fresh as possible. And then light heavyweight, it's realistic.
We don't know what's going on with Yuri.
Right. Well, according to Dana, Yuri's good to go.
That's good. You just don't know what good to go actually means. We're assuming that means his shoulder is okay. But
yeah, I know what you're gonna say. You should have done it in Chicago.
Yeah, they should have. Because then they could have made Yuri versus Jamal Hill in Jamal Hill's hometown. I could have been there. It could have been the main event, my first UFC event in 2 years. There's nothing major scheduled at the United Center in the month of September in my city. It makes absolutely no sense. I've been clamoring for Hill versus Prohaska from the rooftops of MMA Twitter since the fight was even considered for that to be in Chicago. Dana Whyte even told me on Instagram that he'd be coming to Chicago soon. It's the middle of July.
Hold on a minute. Well, you know what? You can send a message to Dana Whyte, Zain. You can send him this.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying? Oh my God. Stop your fucking lying.
That is, if I want to get blocked, which I don't want to do. So I will not be sending him
that. All right, moving on. Jalin Turner, Dan Hooker. This was another excellent fight. Another potential fight of your candidate. Dan Hooker ends up getting the win. I think the judges got it right. I think I had Turner getting the first round, Hooker putting out the last 2 rounds, and Zain, Hooker does this while breaking his arm during the fight.
Yeah, this was overly impressive. Nice to see Dan Hooker back in the win column. Tough week for Jalin Turner, first missing weight and then losing the fight. So he'll have to go back to the drawing board. But Dan Hooker, man, is still one of the toughest dudes in the world in that division. And I think 155. With him still in the picture is alive and well, and he just needs to kickstart his trajectory again and go from there, because I think he's only on his way back up the ladder and not down. That was obviously number 11 versus number 12, so Dan Hooker will move up for sure. Very impressive win, despite it being a split decision, which was, to me, downright stupid, but I'm glad the right guy won. That would have been a travesty had he lost this fight. But yeah, good win for Hooker, and definitely more to come in 24. I would presume, unless they want him to be a part of another pay-per-view. Well, that Sydney card makes some sense. He can get turned around. It looked like he was okay. It depends on what his suspension is, or they could do him later this year. But nonetheless,
he's got a broken arm, Zain. He's got a broken arm. Hey, he ain't fighting at Sydney. Maybe December, maybe, but I don't know.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I'm now remembering the picture. The X-ray did make it seem like it was a bad arm break. So I was overthinking. Yeah, December or early next year makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
But as far as Jalin Turner goes, yeah, I think under normal circumstances, I would say Jalin Turner's stock didn't drop, but I think it did a little bit just on the simple fact that he did miss weight. We talked about how Jalin Turner had everything to gain and Dan Hooker had everything to lose in this fight during the preview that we had last weekend. I feel like all of a sudden Jalin Turner has lost stuff because of the fact that he didn't make weight. And I think not making weight helped to hurt his body a little bit more when Dan Hooker was attacking his body during that second and third round. And ultimately, I mean, I'm glad the fight played out as it did, where the two basically beat each other up from pillar to post. At the same time, Jalin Turner kind of screwed himself a little bit by not making weight.
Oh, 1,000%.
And we know that these things kind of happen. There's more that goes into it as media members, but it's still kind of a really bad thing, which Zain actually leads me into something that happened at PFL Europe 2. Now, obviously, PFL Europe 2 didn't air in America. I still got to cover it as part of my PFL, duties, but there was a fight between a pair of lightweights, Akoydan Duque, Alexander Chizov, that how PFL Europe works, Dan, is a little bit different. So in the normal PFL, in the global PFL stage, like we see on ESPN, obviously now if a fighter misses weight, it's 1 point deducted from the standings. Now, how they do it is in PFL Europe, it's a point deduction in the fight. So we actually had a situation where technically Duque won by unanimous decision, but because he missed weight, all three scorecards read 28-28. The fight was declared a draw. And in the PFL, I think in PFL Europe, a tiebreaker goes to the fighter who didn't miss weight. So technically, Duque wins the fight in the commission record book, but Chizov advances on because he made weight and Duque didn't. So I don't know how you felt about that because people were attacking the PFL online for that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think this falls on the PFL. First, it's the controversy with the fight a couple weeks ago, and now it's this. I think it should make MMA fans upset that now there are all these extra parameters to decide how a fight should play out and who should win and who should lose, all because of stuff that's not happening in the cage. I think is just wrong. And I think the way the UFC does it, where you lose a percentage of your purse, is the right way to do it and the only fair thing to do. Because if you take away a fight, that's a fight off of somebody's career. That's a fight that they trained 8 to 12 weeks for basically no reason, even if they do miss weight. And I just think it hurts the fighters more than anybody else and makes the promotion look worse because they try to have this buttoned up view, but yet do things like this to hinder a fighter's performance. And for me personally, as a non-biased observer of the Professional Fighters League, I think that's exactly what happened.
And even with my connection, I do have to say, Zain, also, you can't forget that there was also the drug testing with multiple suspensions. Now, granted, maybe you don't fault the PFL on that one. On that one, you just go to the fighters and say, what the hell were you doing? I don't know how much you fault the PFL on that one.
I fault them a little bit, but then again, this is just another example of how the PFL needs to get better to attract more fans. The casual audience doesn't like when these things happen because it takes away from what's actually happening in the smart cage.
At the same time, Zain, I think I do like, maybe not so much what happened here with PFL Europe, but I do like the global PFL thing where if you miss weight, and obviously this can't happen in every promotion because the PFL is the only one that has the regular season
In the playoff. Yeah.
But which, by the way, I do actually like. I do like a promotional different. So I do like for the PFL's case that it is 1 point off in the standings. And personally, if you ask me, I think PFL Europe should have taken from that. The thing is with PFL Europe, it's just a straight up tournament. It's one regular season bout, the set playoff, which is a semi, and then the championship. So
Okay.
in that case, there is a little bit of a, I think in that case with PFL Europe, you just got to say you got to get a couple more fighters for your division.
100%.
You can't just have the straight up 8-man tournaments, because then you do have situations like these. But I would assume that where you talked about with the percentage of the fight person, I would assume even with the standings and tournament brackets, I think PFL does the same thing. I think that's more a commission thing than a promotion.
1,000%. Yep.
So
And I think that's something that commissions need to look further into. See, this is another, I don't mean to get off on another tangent, but this is another issue that I have with commissions. If they really cared about the sport and the integrity of MMA, we wouldn't be having conversations like this where we're questioning what the commission is actually doing to ensure that the promotions are doing legitimate work to make sure that every fight is as fair and as equal as possible, especially when it comes to this weight miss stuff. Tom, we're in 2023, for crying out loud. We're still figuring out how instant replay works and how it's used in the sport. We're still having issues with weight misses. We're still having issues with oversaturations of cards. We're still having issues with putting on fights that make zero sense. It's all happening under several commissions' watches, and they're doing nothing about it. Nothing.
You're not wrong. And Zain, but you bring up PFL, I would stretch this over to UFC too, because then I don't know if we're having these conversations. It wasn't so long ago, Zain. It might have been during the COVID time. We talked about all these weight misses, and guess what? The fighters who are missing weight are winning the fights.
It's not fair.
It's not, because you talk about, taking away, the fact that Duque doesn't get to move on isn't fair because technically he won the fight. But the fights themselves are not fair when you consider that one guy has extra weight behind him and his opponent actually made weight. It's more fair.
Yeah, it literally feels like we're going like 15 years in the past, back to the whole issue with the end of the Pride era and how all of these fights were essentially worked by the Yakuza, which is how Pride was deceased. And we don't want to go down a similar path like that again. I'm not accusing anyone of anything.
I think that's a bit of a stretch to make that kind of comparison. How about I throw you one solution, Zain?
Okay. And no, I wasn't trying to make it a stretch. It just my point in saying that it feels like we're going backwards in time. What are we doing?
Okay, fair. But I'll give you a solution. Point blank. The promoters aren't going to like this one. Maybe the commission's not, but I think it's pretty simple and makes the point. Fighter misses weight. Fighter can't continue. Okay. You're out. The fight's off. You're out. And then let's take this Jalin Turner, Dan Hooker one, for example. All right. I turn to Jalin Turner. All right. Fight is canceled. You're out. And Hooker, here's your show money. Here's your win money.
Yeah. I mean, if he has no worthy opponent that can step up on however many days' notice, that's the only thing that should be done.
I think this might be a little strict, especially because we're trying to defend fighters. But I think that's the only fair thing is you give the other guy his show money and his win money, and then you call off the fight.
1,000%.
Which I think sounds easier, more simple, because the part where that gets murky is what happens when it's the title fight, because then all of a sudden we're a main event.
For sure. But the thing that I will say about that is I do think title fights should be handled a little differently, where the fight is now like for a non-title. I think that's fair. But at the same time, it's not fair to the champ, because if the champ doesn't miss weight, then I don't know.
You bring that up. You remember what happened in Bellator? I think it was last year. We had a situation where a challenger missed weight, but they still fought, and they said if the champ loses, the title's vacant.
Mm-hmm.
So
which by the way, people were confused about that one too. So,
yeah, and I didn't like when Bellator did that. I didn't think that was actually fair. Now, I think the UFC, when Oliveira missed weight in the case of a champ losing their belt on the scales, I think the UFC handled it properly when Oliveira fought Gaethje. give the challenger still the chance to win the title.
Yeah, although my argument to that is the Arizona Commission was petty, and I thought that weight miss was a little bit bizarre because of the scale thing.
Yeah, there was multiple fighters. Yeah, there was that controversy. My point is just, you're right. We need a more fair system for both the fighters who miss weight and for the fighters who make the weight and their opponent misses, and it opens the opportunity that their opponent wins the fight.
1,000%.
Bo Nickel, obviously the fight with Val Woodburn. I mean, credit to Val Woodburn for stepping up. He was finished a little too quickly. I would have given Val more of a chance, but I mean, Bo Nickel flashed his hands, and I thought it was going to be I thought he was going to take him down to finish him, but he did it on the feet.
Yeah, Bo Nickel looked good, did what he needed to do against Val Woodburn, and is without a doubt one of the most exciting prospects in all of MMA. I need to see a little bit more from him, but definitely someone that you could build a division around, and quite frankly, a newer generation of fans that just got into the sport. Bo Nickel could be a guy that people could really get behind, given his background and just a very cool story, and definitely someone who's must-watch TV. And for Val Woodburn, you have to give him all the credit in the world for taking the fight on so many days' notice. Dana White did say he will get another fight. Hopefully, they give him a full camp and a guy that they feel he can compete well against, and with a similar record. So I'm excited to see more of Woodburn. We really didn't get a chance to see a ton from him, of course, because the fight was so short. But yeah, definitely a very good performance for Nickel, and someone who I think is going to have a massive 2024 coming up here in the next several months.
Definitely. Also, salute to Robbie Lawler. Again, we went more into it onto our post-fight stream from Sunday, but that was probably, as I said, the greatest retirement ever. The way it was handled, the way he won the fight, the way he got emotional, the video, it was perfect.
It was 100% perfect. A great way for a legend to go out. One of my favorite fighters, one of your favorite fighters, I think one of everybody's favorite fighters, to be quite honest. Media member or not, you have to feel good for Robbie Lawler with that knockout. A nice bookend to a career on ABC in Vegas. It's like his fight with Steve Berger at UFC 37.5 early on in his career. One of the greatest signings in the early Zuffa era was Dana White going to Hawaii to find Robbie Lawler at a local event. That's one of the greatest and most underrated signings in MMA history. And props to Robbie Lawler for all that he's done, not just for the UFC, but for the sport, bringing in many, many, many generations of fans and a lot of legendary moments. So congratulations on a well-deserved week and retirement swan song, without a doubt.
Just to wrap things up so we can get moving to the other headlines, some other performances. Shout out Denise Gomez for that upset 20-second knockout of Yasmin Jurigui, who tasted defeat for the first time. Jesus Aguilar, one of the best overhand punch knockouts I've ever seen. He just blasted Stephen Ross absolutely out cold. Cameron Simon, obviously a teammate of Dricus du Plessis, getting the big win first round. And like I said, Rivovic versus Kirk. I thought, are we starting with the fight of the night? And then just more fight of the nights continued to develop over the course of the card. So
yeah, very very solid card overall. You would probably agree with this, but my first A+ of the year goes to this event 100%. And Tom, knowing the UFC's momentum with pay-per-views right now, I think you and I are in for a very exhausting and exhilarating fall, but it should be absolutely amazing.
Yep. So remember all that debate we were talking about, 285, 287 for card of the year? I think both got blasted away.
Yeah, 285 and 287 are definitely ranked in the top 5 for sure, but number one, without a doubt, at least for this very moment in time, is UFC 290, Volkanovski versus Rodriguez during International Fight Week 2023, which means we are 9 UFC pay-per-views away. That's right, we've hit the single digits. 9 UFC pay-per-views away from UFC 300 and what we presume is going to be in April of 2024. More on that in future episodes to come, because we have fight news to break down. We had a lot of different.
We got a lot of news we got to break down. A lot stemming outside of International Fight Week. So I did a breaking news stream about this on Friday when the news broke. But Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic is officially a go. Madison Square Garden, New York City, November 11th, UFC 295. And Zain, I mean, like I said, I was praying for this fight to happen at MSG. It will. We thought it was going to happen this point, International Fight Week, but MSG is the next best thing. Jon Jones, New York born, Stipe, and one of the greatest fighters of all time. Stipe Miocic, the greatest heavyweight the UFC has ever had. It just makes the most sense. It just makes the absolute sense that these two get to do it. And as you alluded to earlier, potentially both get to retire at the Mecca, Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, this is truly this is the UFC's version of like Ali Frazier, Ali Foreman. This feels like that kind of a fight. And I will tell you this, being the longtime MMA fan that I am, this is one that I will not miss, and I will hopefully do everything in my power to make sure I am there in some capacity because it just feels that big. And I can always say years from now when I'm really old that I was at a fight of that magnitude, but we'll get there as it gets closer. But still, UFC 30-year anniversary, the day before UFC 1, back in 1993, to have the two of the greatest fighters ever to lock horns in the cage. I mean, just really one of the greatest scenarios you could possibly have. And I guess you could say that this is Jon Jones's toughest test. Early pick is Jones, the late third round, early fourth round TKO. But man, being the Midwest guy that I am, I would love to see Stipe Miocic dethrone the GOAT in Madison Square Garden in essentially Jon Jones's hometown. To win the heavyweight title for the city of Cleveland would be absolutely unbelievable. And that's a fight that to me deserves a world tour for sure. Given his Midwest roots, I really hope they go to Cleveland or they go to Chicago so I could go to either of those press conferences. That would be really cool. But this feels like a big fight, and yeah, I mean, at the time of this recording, we're what, like 4 months out from it, so
yep.
it'll be
exactly 4 months out.
Yeah, it's gonna be one where we're gonna be excited the entire week to the point where that's all we're gonna be thinking about.
Actually, 2 days after my birthday too, so yeah, I'm pretty excited for that. It's a good birthday present. If anybody wants to get me tickets for UFC 295 as an early birthday present, that'd be nice. Just saying.
Yeah, I you should ask for that for your birthday if you have not.
I just did. If Stipe Miocic wins the heavyweight, you expect him to do an Irish jig again like he did against Cormier?
Probably.
No, it's absolutely exciting fight. It's GOAT versus GOAT. It's one of the best that the UFC, let alone MMA, let alone UFC has ever seen, versus the only guy who has defended the heavyweight title 3+ times. And if he beats Jon, he joins Randy Couture as the only 3+, the guy with 3 or more title reigns in UFC heavyweight history. This is big status, big fight field for both guys.
Yeah, what sucks is Randy Couture won't be able to see it because he's banned from going to any UFC events.
Yeah. Of course, my favorite fighter of all time has to be banned from the UFC. Of course.
Of course he does. But yeah, nonetheless, I know this is a 4-month PSA. Buy the pay-per-view as early as you can. Literally, the second they show the advertisement, buy the pay-per-view. This is going to be one of the biggest pay-per-views ever. In my opinion, it has a chance to do 2 million buys. That's how big this heavyweight title fight feels. So the UFC better build a card that makes it feel like it's one of the biggest cards ever, which I'm sure they will. But yeah, get excited. Set your countdowns. Start looking at flights because the fight is done. The fight is official. the fight is coming, and it's one that you definitely do not want to miss by any stretch of the imagination. 100%.
Now you know what fight isn't technically done. It's not announced, but it's being teased and reported as done. Another big heavyweight clash. A little different though. Tyson Fury, Francis Ngannou. Over the weekend, per Ariel Helwani tweeting this out, he says an announcement is to be made soon. We're actually recording this during the time where the MMA Hour is airing, and as of yet, there is no announcement, no other follow-up report from him. We just know it's expected to be announced. It's expected to be announced soon.
Okay, Tom, I have a question. Do you believe in the theory that once this fight was reported that it was expected to be announced, that Dana White immediately said, "Okay, it's time to announce Jones versus Stipe to counter Fury versus Ngannou," or do you think that's a load of crap?
I think, I mean, it definitely helps, but I don't think it was, I like the idea is there, but I think it was always the plan. John Jones was there in Las Vegas. We saw him, we saw him making amends with Israel Adesanya. So John Jones was there. Stipe was there. He was the fighter at the big Modelo event that they always show in the UFC broadcast, and they officially announced the fight. I think, Zain, the plan was to, I think there was always some sort of plan to announce it for the Garden during this fight week, but you wish there could have been a little more. And you wish maybe, you wish there could have been a little more with Jones, Stipe, and
apparently, according to Ariel, also shout out to him for this. He said they had planned to do a press conference, but they couldn't get the deal done in time to make the press conference happen.
Okay, so the deal couldn't get done right away, but I think once the announcement of Fury and Ngannou went out, Zain, they couldn't wait for the broadcast, and Dana had to go live on the Friday. I mean, Zain, he did it in front of the Power Slap. He did it in front of the Power Slap set. Now, granted, they had Power Slap that night, but
yes, which full disclosure, I did watch.
Of course you did.
But I have to ask you this, Tom. Is there any way we could have the biggest day in combat sports by having Fury versus Ngannou go head to head with UFC 295?
I hope not. I don't want to miss either fight.
Could you imagine?
I can imagine, yes, but I don't want to miss either fight.
I could imagine if that happens that Dana's gonna ban whoever works the Madison Square Garden jumbo screens to ensure that fight is not being shown by any stretch of the imagination on the screens at Madison Square Garden. That will be off limits at night if they happen to go the same night.
I might have to change my birthday request stuff if Fury and Ngannou is booked for November 11th. I'd have to figure out a way to watch both fights, but yeah. Now, the other thing coming out of this, Sam, which actually I failed to mention when we talked about this last week, because we mentioned the whole Charlo situation, there are some people who are calling, namely, I want to make sure I get his name right, the manager, promoter of Alexander Usyk, Alex Krasiuk, who are saying that Tyson Fury, if he takes this fight with Ngannou, should be... Now, granted, it could be an exhibition bout. That was the first mentioned it last week. Even if it's an exhibition, some are saying that if Tyson takes this fight with Francis, he should be stripped of the WBC title. Do you agree?
Even if it is an exhibition, he should be stripped considering how long he's been out. Yeah.
Does that...
I was going to say he hasn't fought in like over a year and a half, right?
I want to say fair enough, but at the same time, it's Francis Ngannou. At the same time, it's somebody who honestly could help bring some eyes to your sport.
1000%. I see this fight airing on DAZN with Eddie Hearn being the promoter. What do you think?
Normally, I would say ESPN Plus because Tyson Fury is under Top Rank and Francis Ngannou with the PFL and ESPN. But the fact that Eddie Hearn mentioned it last week kind of caught my eye.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe somebody talked to Dana and they proposed the idea of.
By the way, he last fought in December. He did retain against Chisora.
Oh, that's right.
So I don't know if I can necessarily say strip him, but I mean, Zain, I would only be for stripping him if it meant that it opened up the door for Alexander Usyk to become the undisputed champion, which I don't know if that will happen because
boxing gets in its own way again.
Exactly. All right. Let's talk about another big name in the sport, Zain. Let's talk about Conor. Because Conor also made headlines during International Fight Week when that episode aired of him and Michael Chandler getting into the altercation inside the tough cage, and you saw Dana White going, out of my way.
Yeah, so for those who haven't seen it, Dana White did an interview with TSN's Aaron Bronstetter where Dana revealed that the fight is still being talked about. He is adamant that Conor will fight by the end of the year, but did call out USADA subconsciously, whether he meant it or not. That's up for debate. But the question now becomes, is Conor going to get that exemption? Apparently, according to Twitter, Conor did tweet a little Christmas emoji to say that he wants December. Tom, did he delete the tweet yet, or does he still have it up?
I haven't checked, but what's funny is Amy Kaplan, my editor at Fanside at MMA, your former editor, Zain, did ask about that when at the post-fight press conference, and actually that's when Dana went off and basically flat out told the outlets who reported that headline, saying, quote, who cares what USADA says? He basically said, he flat out said F you, and said basically implied he was taken out of context.
Yeah, which probably means any of those outlets who did write that story is probably getting their ban letters from UFC PR as we speak. Unfortunately, for those curious, I will not be one of them that is receiving that. Granted, I do not have access to the UFC credentialed media list, but I will say that is a call out of all call outs. And in typical Dana White fashion, he was very upset. And yeah.
I mean, on one hand, as you kind of alluded to, he technically did say it, but when we were looking at that footage with Bronstetter, it feels like he was kind of just if you look at the full scope of the picture, he was basically saying, I'm worried about this weekend. I'm not worried about what's going to happen months from now.
Right, which is what Dana was trying to say that he meant.
Correct. Now, granted, Conor himself tweeted out the Santa Claus emoji. And he has basically, I saw in another tweet, Zain, I don't know if that's delayed or not, but he flat out said December. He wants December. He did tease, Robbie Lawler will probably be out of retirement by December and fight him, but the assumption is, between those comments by Dana and the Conor tweet, Zain, the assumption is, at least on our part, they're still trying to get the USADA exemption.
Yeah, they're still trying to get the USADA exemption. December 16th is wide open for a pay-per-view that night, which is what the UFC put in a T-Mobile license for, which they were approved for. So yeah, that date is still open. And
the fact that Dana mentioned that and Conor made that tweet, Zain, actually makes me feel a little bit better considering my rants from the last week. So it seems like the fight is still, we can't say on because it's not official, but that there is hope. There is hope that this fight is still going to happen December 16th.
Okay, so do you think now they're just trying to brush over the sexual assault allegations that took place a month ago? Because that's also another layer to this whole story. Yeah. And I hate to bring it up, but it's part of the story too.
It's part of the story of Conor McGregor. It's part of his whole story about all these legal issues. We talked about that when we talked about the sexual assault allegations.
Yep.
It's all part of the story.
Okay, wait. So at the time that this is being aired, I'm going to ask you this question. It's July 11, 2023. Yes or no, does Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler happen in December at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas? Or do they move the fight as maybe we were speculating it might happen?
I say it happens December 16th, but for that to happen, we need it within the next month, or we need the announcement within the next 4 to 6 weeks. By the time Tough is done, we need the announcement.
Which is what they were planning on doing anyway. They were planning to announce it before the season was over. Which, don't be surprised if at the UFC 292 press conference we get the major promo. So
it's either I would even say, Zain, even if they wait till 292 itself, by UFC 292, the fight has to be official. The fight has to be announced.
Okay.
I think that's my deadline. So they've got a month and a week or something.
Yeah, so the clock is ticking over at the clock is ticking over in over at UFC HQ. That's for sure. every minute that we keep talking about is every minute that the fight is not official. So
yep. All right.
Trust me, if I was the intern, I would be grilling whoever I'd have to grill every day, asking what the status of that fight is.
All right, just to wrap things up with a few more headlines. Poor intern.
Yeah, actually, in all seriousness, poor UFC intern who has to sit on this that probably knows what the date is but can't say anything.
Mm-hmm. And poor intern who's in the war room this morning too.
Yeah, that's not going to be good.
All right, couple of headlines to finish this off. So, Zain, after talking about what the hell could be next for Deontay Wilder, talking about negotiations with Ruiz aren't going well, negotiations with Joshua, the tease from Eddie Hearn about Saudi Arabia later this month, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Zain, Anthony Joshua and Dillian Whyte are going to fight next month on DAZN. DAZN pay-per-view for those in the UK and Ireland. Sorry, guys, but it's going to be free for us in the US.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. But Tom, my question is, why is Dillian Whyte getting this rematch now? The timing of it to me just doesn't make any sense. Again,
I can say nothing else. I mean, am I gonna watch this fight? I mean, as long as it's true. I mean, we looked on my DAZN account before, Zain, and it didn't seem like it seemed like it would be free for us. You just needed the DAZN subscription. So as long as it's just a DAZN subscription, yeah, I'll be watching.
Go ahead. Sorry.
But I mean, I guess I'll still say this argument anyway for our friends over at the UK and Ireland.
Okay.
I'd say maybe it's a little different for them considering their price and everything. But I mean, if it was DAZN pay-per-view here in the US, we haven't even gotten to Paul versus Diaz yet, which is going to say a lot for the DAZN pay-per-view model on August 5th. You gotta wait, man. If it was pay-per-views back-to-back weekends, especially Zain, back-to-back weekends after the massive combat sports world is going to go through on July 29th between Crawford Spence and UFC 291 and the Bellator Ryzen stuff. Like, you gotta chill. So it better be, just the subscription, and I better not be mistaken. Otherwise, I'm gonna have the rant of all rants next week.
Yeah, well, it doesn't look like it because I looked it up on DAZN's US website, and there's no indication of pay-per-view in the United States, which is a good thing.
Yeah,
but until I get the official press release from DAZN, which, by the way, I was able to sign up for DAZN's releases a week ago, then I will really know the real truth based on what DAZN PR tells everybody. So, yeah, definitely not a circuits fight per se, but a fight where if you're an Anthony Joshua fan, you're pumped about it. It's just, to me, Dillian Whyte at this phase in his career, I don't know if a rematch makes sense, but nonetheless, though, DAZN just continuously pumping out content. They've been fights almost every single weekend this entire summer, and that's another massive blockbuster fight. Do you notice a trend here, Tom? Almost every single weekend, DAZN is trying to entice you to watch every event because there's at least one big name on every event that they have in the boxing world.
Absolutely, and
It's
you know,
it's
they're-
kind of a smart marketing tactic. Is it not?
it is like they're trying to, we talked about how they need to compete. They need to get that surge against the likes of the ESPN Pluses and the Fox Sportses and Showtimes. This is the way to do it. My question is about this fight. Now, obviously, Joshua has already competed this year when he took on Franklin. Yeah, Jermaine Franklin. Uh,
In a very lackluster performance by the way.
are they going to use this rematch so that way to kind of lure, that way so it can help set up a potential showdown with Deontay Wilder in December in Saudi Arabia, kind of like Eddie Hearn kind of teased last week.
Yeah, they'll probably end up flying Deontay Wilder in for this fight. That would be my prediction.
Otherwise, Deontay Wilder may not have a choice but to do the Ruiz fight. But those two they can't seem to get the negotiation straight with the fight first split.
Right. And there's no date,
Right?
right?
Yeah.
Oh, so yeah, Andy Ruiz is just in limbo. Oh, this is a very important fight that most people realize. If I'm Andy Ruiz, I'm rooting that I'm rooting with every ounce of energy that I have for Dillian Whyte to ruin DAZN's plans. Yeah.
Basically, you're right. GSP is back. Yes, as a fighter, but not in the octagon. He is going to be competing in the UFC Fight Pass Invitational in December. It's submission wrestling and jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I've never watched UFPI. That's what I'm going to call it. I've never watched UFPI live, but this will entice me to do so. George St. Pierre, class act of the sport, gave a shout out to Gordon Ryan, which I thought was super cool, calling him the best grappler of all time, which is a bold statement considering how many amazing MMA grapplers there have been over the years. So to hear that come from George St. Pierre was very, very interesting in my opinion. But yeah, this is the. Go ahead.
Do you think? He was teasing a few names on there, like one Khabib. Do you think he gets one of these big names to face him in this submission wrestling event at FPI?
You can't have George St. Pierre fight anybody random. It has to be somebody worth coming back for. And without a doubt, it would be the biggest event in UFC Fight Pass history, and I think it would do very well.
I hope so. I definitely will be tuning in. But Zain, we do have one fight to talk about for this weekend. UFC Vegas 77 Apex, baby! Holly Holm, Maria Mayra Bueno Silva.
Yeah, back at the UFC Apex, and I can't say much, but I'll have something a little bit special planned for this card, so stay tuned for my to my Twitter for that. It's a rare opportunity, but I'm not going to get into it at this very moment. Nonetheless, though, this main event is going to be pretty interesting. Mayra Bueno Silva is going to be playing the heel role here. If she beats Holly Holm, it obviously it raises a lot of eyebrows. There's this whole floating around about Ronda Rousey potentially coming back. Holly Holm has been inactive for at least a little bit now, back in another main event position. I'd say Holly Holm by decision is the pick here in this one, and I don't think it'll be very close. Although if Bueno Silva does keep it standing, and Holly Holm is susceptible to strikers who fight orthodox, which I believe we've seen Silva demonstrate that in previous encounters, just in the past. I think we could be in for a very entertaining fight.
See, I forgot about that because I was thinking this was going to be a straight up kickboxing versus grappling kind of matchup. But I forgot about Silva and her orthodox style. So
yeah,
I could see that giving some trouble. Ultimately, Zain, I think this fight is going to be somewhat important only because of the vacant title at 135. If Holm wins this fight, I could see the UFC, just because she's a former champ, she's throwing her with Juliana Pena for the vacant title. If not, that opens up the door to Raquel Pennington, and that opens up the door to the crazy ideas then of one RR in a return, if somehow that's true after she leaves WWE.
Yeah, it's all very interesting. So yeah, that's UFC Vegas 77 in a nutshell.
Ultimately, by the way, I forgot. Ultimately, I do agree with you though. Holm by decision.
For sure. But yeah, that's UFC Vegas 77 in a nutshell. Tom, if you could clarify for me, is this exclusive to ESPN Plus or is this on ESPN?
I believe this is on. Network ESPN.
Makes sense with Holly Holm as the main event. So everyone who is a non-ESPN Plus subscriber, you are in luck. Of course, the rest of the world will get it on UFC Fight Pass, BT Sport, and the like. But that's going to do it for another episode of the MMA Outsiders. This has been episode 46, courtesy of the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Before we get out of here, be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to follow our show at MMA Outsiders ETB all across social media. Be sure, if you're on Facebook checking this out, give us a like. If you're on Twitter, give us a retweet. And if you're on Threads, if this episode somehow makes its way onto the new platform called Threads, thanks to Instagram trying to compete with Twitter, you can re-thread it, if you will, for your eyeballs to be on another platform. Nonetheless, to reintroduce ourselves, I'm Zain Bando. I'm a staff writer over at bjpen.com, also a member of the Bellator Rankings panel. Shout out to the amazing PR team over at Bellator. They are the best at what they do, and I'm just saying that they truly are some of the most stand-up people in the entire industry. So if you have a chance to work with the guys over there, please do so at BZA. They are the best at what they do. And then, of course, Tom over to my left is a contributor for Fansided MMA who's cranking out UFC recaps every single Saturday. I have no idea how he does it, but as someone who used to do recaps a long time ago back in the day, I'm very proud that he continues to hold down the fort for almost every single UFC main event. You can find his work again over at Fansided MMA. Follow him over at Thomas J. Albano, and of course, keep it locked into everything that he does over on the PFL's website, as the PFL postseason will be taking shape in the next month or so. That's all the time we have. We thank you again for tuning in. It's a light week in combat sports, but please, whatever you do, enjoy the fights and stay safe. And of course, before we get out of here, we just want to remind you one last time, as we always like to do on this show, be Joe Piper.
Be Joe Piper. Obviously, if you're catching this on the day that it's premiering, we do have Tough Enough tonight. A reminder, tonight's Tough Enough due to the MLB All-Star Game live stream that'll be taking place on the network. We're going to be pushed back a little bit to 11:30 Eastern, 10:30 Central, 8:30 out on the West Coast. For this week only, due to the All-Star Game stream, we'll go back to our normal time immediately after Tough, starting next week. And of course, if you're watching this after Tuesday, the 11th, you can check out Tough Enough as well and our archives on the YouTube and social media pages. But yeah, that's going to do it. Just that reminder. On Albano, that's it. We'll catch you next time on the MMA Outsiders. Take care.
Take care, and we'll see you then. Enjoy the fights.